I want my baby back. I just simply want my daughter back.
Jay-Z investigates uncovering new information about the murder of a 19-year-old whose body was dumped over a bridge near Annapolis. A suspect we know in custody tonight, and authorities saying he's in the country illegally.
Imagine a young woman full of promise. She was bright, ambitious, and full of life. Her family adored her, her friends cherished her, and her future seemed limitless. But in the blink of an eye, that future was stolen, cut short by a crime so chilling, so senseless, that it left an entire community reeling. This is the story of De'Ara Thompson. A story not just about her life and tragic death, but about the failures, questions, and haunting aftermath that followed. Before we go deeper, let me ask you this. What happens when the very systems meant to protect us fail? What happens when red flags are ignored, when warnings are overlooked, and when a young woman in danger is not given the urgency she deserved? That's the reality at the center of this case, and it's one that raises tough, uncomfortable questions about law enforcement, immigration, and the way society handles missing persons, especially young Black women. Write your comment below. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because before the headlines, before the search teams, and before the grim discovery inside a quiet suburban home, there was a family. A family that loved their daughter. A family that believed in her future. A family that never imagined their lives would be torn apart by violence from someone hiding in plain sight. This case isn't just about one man's brutal actions, it's about trust. Trust between communities and the institutions meant to protect them. Trust that was tested and, for many, shattered. And as we peel back the layers, you'll see how a chain of decisions, some small, others critical, set the stage for a tragedy that could have been prevented. But to understand how we got here, we have to start at the beginning. With a young woman named De'Ara Thompson, whose smile lit up every room, whose dreams were still unfolding, and whose story deserves to be told in full. Because in true crime, the focus often drifts to the perpetrator, their background, their motives, their mistakes. But tonight, we begin with her, who she was, where she came from, and the life she lived before her name became a headline. Hi guys, grab a cup of coffee and settle in for this thrilling true crime story. I'd love to know where you're watching this video from. Let me know in the comments. Don't hesitate to join the conversation too. Your thoughts and input are a vital part of this story. Welcome to 24/7 True Crime Chronicles, where all our stories are based on true crimes. Kindly support us by subscribing to this channel and turn on the notification bell icon so you won't miss any of our newest stories. Let's continue the story. Before the headlines, before the police reports, before the frantic searches and news cameras, there was simply De'Ara. To her family, she wasn't a name in a case file. She wasn't a statistic. She was their daughter, their sister, their source of joy and laughter. Born and raised in a home filled with love, De'Ara grew up surrounded by the warmth of family ties. Those who knew her often described her as radiant, with a smile that seemed to chase away shadows. Her parents were her foundation, people who taught her values, discipline, and the importance of never giving up on her dreams. They had watched her grow from a curious little girl into a young woman ready to carve her own path. For them, her future was a blank canvas, and they were eager to see the masterpiece she would create. But De'Ara wasn't just a daughter. She was a friend, a confidant, and a light in her community. Neighbors knew her as the type of person who would stop to lend a hand, offer a kind word, or simply brighten someone's day with her presence. She was deeply connected to those around her, and even as she transitioned into adulthood, her bond with her family remained strong. Life wasn't perfect, of course. Like any young adult, De'Ara had challenges, disagreements, and growing pains. But through it all, her family relationships were her anchor. They trusted her, and she trusted them. That trust would later become the reason her disappearance set off alarms within her household almost immediately. Because when De'Ara stopped answering her phone, when her routine broke, they knew something was terribly wrong. But let's pause here for a moment. Because while De'Ara's life was one of love and promise, in the background, something darker was already circling her world. A shadow that would eventually pull her into danger. That shadow came in the form of a man named Hugo Hernandez-Mendez. Now, at first glance, Hernandez-Mendez didn't appear like the villain of a true crime story. To many who crossed his path, he was simply another man trying to build a life in America. But peel back the surface, and a troubling history emerged. He had already crossed the radar of federal authorities. He had already been arrested, already given a chance to be kept off the streets. But each time, doors opened and he walked free. And while Diarra's family was building dreams, while she was living her life, Hernandez-Mendez was living under the same sky, harboring secrets that no one could fully see. Their worlds would eventually collide, with consequences that still haunt everyone who followed this case. For now, though, picture Diarra at home, talking with her parents, laughing with friends, planning her next steps in life. She was 19 years old, a young woman on the edge of independence. Her life was supposed to be just beginning. No one could have imagined that within months she would vanish. No one could have predicted that the safe, familiar patterns of her life would break in the most terrifying way. But soon, her family would be thrown into a nightmare that no parent, no sibling, no community should ever endure. Because when Diarra disappeared, it wasn't just a case of a young woman gone missing. It became a test of how quickly a family's voice could cut through the noise, how much weight a community's cries carried, and how far authorities were willing or unwilling to go in those first, crucial hours. It started quietly, almost innocently. A missed call here, a text left unanswered there. For a 19-year-old, that might not immediately set off alarm bells. After all, young adults sometimes crave independence. They go off the grid for a few hours, maybe even a day or two, to clear their minds or enjoy their own space. But this was different. Diarra Thompson was not the type to vanish without telling anyone. She was close with her family, reliable with her friends, and careful about her safety. So when her phone went silent, when her routine suddenly broke, her family's worry turned quickly into fear. At first, they tried to convince themselves there was a logical explanation. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she had gone to spend the night at a friend's house. But as the hours stretched into a full day, and then into two, reality began to sink in. Something was terribly wrong. Her family reported her missing. They expected that, given her age and her responsible nature, law enforcement would take immediate and urgent action. But instead, they were met with hesitation. Authorities initially categorized her case as non-critical. She was a healthy adult, they reasoned, not a child, not elderly, not someone presumed to be in immediate danger. That classification would prove costly, because in missing persons cases, the first 24 to 48 hours are the most crucial. Those are the hours when leads are fresh, when witnesses remember details, when evidence is still within reach. Every moment wasted is a door closed. Her family knew this. That's why, even when official action lagged, they refused to stay silent. They began distributing flyers themselves, plastering Diarra's picture across the community. They went door to door, canvassing neighborhoods, speaking to anyone who might have seen her. Their love turned into fuel for a grassroots search that would soon draw in volunteers, neighbors, and even strangers touched by the story of a young woman gone missing. But here's where the tension deepens. While her family pushed relentlessly, authorities were slower to act in the public eye. Flyers did exist, but the wide media blitz that could have spread her image across every television screen and social feed didn't come right away. Instead, awareness grew largely through her family's persistence and the online networks of community groups determined not to let her name fade into silence. One of those groups was the Black and Missing Foundation, an organization that has fought tirelessly for cases like Diarra's to be treated with the urgency they deserve. For too long, the disappearances of Black women have not received the same level of coverage or law enforcement resources as others. And in this case, that gap was painfully obvious. Still, her family pressed on. Each night without answers stretched heavier than the last. Each morning began with the same desperate hope that today would bring news, that today someone would step forward with information, that today she would come home. But the story only grew darker, because soon, investigators uncovered video evidence showing Diarra stepping into a vehicle, one later linked to a man whose name would send shockwaves through the community, Hugo Hernandez-Mendez. At that moment, the case took on a new dimension. No longer was it simply the mystery of a missing young woman. Now, it was a race against time to track down the man last seen with her. A man whose past interactions with law enforcement should have raised every red flag long before he ever crossed paths with Diera. But before we peel back the layers of who Hernandez-Mendez really was, pause and consider the family's position. They had done everything right. They had sounded the alarm early. They had begged for attention, spread her image, rallied the community. And still, the answers they needed most remained just out of reach. The search for Diera Thompson was no longer just a family effort. It had become a community mission. People who had never met her were now walking the streets with flyers, scrolling endlessly through social media, and whispering prayers at night. The energy was growing, but so was the fear. Everyone wanted answers, but no one was prepared for the truth that was about to come out. Police investigators, following leads and community tips, traced the case to a quiet suburban home on Cambridge Drive in Bowie, Maryland. From the outside, it looked ordinary. A house like any other. Families drove past it every day, never suspecting that behind those walls, something horrific had unfolded. When investigators entered, they quickly realized this wasn't a missing person mystery anymore. Inside one of the bedrooms, they found what they dreaded most: blood. Blood that, after testing, was confirmed to belong to Diera Thompson. The horrifying reality hit like a wave. Diera had been killed inside that very home. The home belonged to relatives of Hugo Hernandez-Mendez, the man now at the center of the storm. His cousin, shaken and heartbroken, later admitted she never thought someone in her family could do something like this. She described how Hernandez-Mendez had been living there with her family, but over time his behavior had changed. He had grown distant, unpredictable, and harder to understand. In the aftermath of the discovery, Hernandez-Mendez's family was left in disbelief. His cousin said the thought of a loved one committing such an act shattered her completely. Yet the evidence inside the bedroom left no doubt. Diera had entered that house alive. She never left it the same way.
Government has made status of individuals relevant. This was someone who was in their custody, and they made the decision to release him. So I think the questions should be asked of the Justice Department.
And ICE has now issued a detainer for the suspect. Now, the victim worked for a nonprofit that was one of Governor Moore's initiatives, and the governor tonight is calling her a bright light, and he is promising accountability for anyone responsible for her murder.
There are no additional suspects. However, this investigation is ongoing.
Thompson, who lived with her dad, disappeared after going out to get gas. She sent him this text.
I should be back soon. I love you too. Good night.
The
Neighbors stood stunned. Bowie wasn't the kind of place where this kind of violence happened. One woman recalled how state troopers knocked on her door, asking questions as part of the investigation. To her, it was surreal. The quiet safety of her community suddenly shaken by the knowledge that a young woman had lost her life just a few houses away. And then came the deeper, more disturbing questions. Who exactly was Hugo Hernandez-Mendez? And why wasn't he stopped before tragedy struck? Because Hernandez-Mendez wasn't just any suspect. He had a past that should have raised alarms. Authorities confirmed he was originally from Guatemala and had entered the United States on an unknown date. But what wasn't unknown were his run-ins with the law. Just months before Diera's murder, Hernandez-Mendez had been arrested by U.S. Park Police on the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. The charge? Driving under the influence. That alone was alarming enough. But what made it worse was this. He was undocumented. In a system where federal authorities often stress removing undocumented individuals with criminal charges, Hernandez-Mendez should have been held. He should have been flagged. But instead, after that DUI arrest, he was released. The decision baffled many. Why wasn't he detained? Why wasn't he handed over to immigration authorities? Those are the questions that echoed loudly after Diera's murder. Some officials deflected blame, pointing to federal policies. Others argued that miscommunication between agencies played a role. But one fact was undeniable. Hernandez-Mendez was free when he should not have been, and because of that, Diera Thompson never made it home. To make matters even more tragic, the investigation at the house didn't stop with Hernandez-Mendez. His cousin revealed that immigration agents came back the next day, not just for him, but also for her husband, who was taken despite her insistence he had nothing to do with the crime. The family was left in shambles, torn apart by association with a man whose actions they could not comprehend. Meanwhile, Diarra's family received the news no parent should ever hear. Their daughter was gone. The very hope that had driven their search, the prayers, the sleepless nights, the knocking on doors collapsed in an instant. Their nightmare had reached its darkest point. But if the discovery of her body was devastating, the revelations about Hernandez-Mendez's past were infuriating. It wasn't just that he had killed. It was that the system had given him opportunities to be stopped, and each time he had slipped through. The Black and Missing Foundation, which had already stepped in to amplify Diarra's case, was blunt in their message. Every missing person deserves urgency. Every case should be treated as critical from the very beginning. Because families can't wait, communities can't wait, and tragedies like this prove what happens when urgency is delayed. Meanwhile, Hernandez-Mendez sat in custody, facing the full weight of murder charges. But for many, his arrest did not bring comfort. It brought fury. He should have never had the opportunity to commit this crime. His DUI arrest months earlier was a flashing warning sign, but that sign was ignored. And by the time the system realized its mistake, it was too late. For Diarra's parents, the pain wasn't just about their loss. It was about knowing their daughter's death was preventable. They were left replaying every moment, every call, every flyer, and wondering, if action had been taken sooner, would Diarra still be alive? The community echoed their outrage. Vigils turned into calls for accountability. Advocates demanded changes in how missing person cases are classified, how law enforcement communicates with the public, and how federal authorities handle undocumented offenders with criminal charges. The case became not just a story of one young woman's death, but a call to examine the very flaws of the systems meant to protect society. And yet, despite all the outcry, one truth remains unshakable. Nothing will bring Diarra back. Her story ended far too soon. Her family will forever carry the weight of what they lost, and her community will always remember her as more than just a victim. But in that heartbreak lies a message. A chilling reminder of the stakes when urgency is delayed, when red flags are ignored, when policies are followed without compassion. Diarra's case forces us all to ask hard questions. How many others have been overlooked? How many families are still searching, praying, hoping that their missing loved one will be found in time? For true crime audiences, this story is gripping, tragic, and filled with twists. But for Diarra's family, it is not a story, it is their reality. A reality that shattered their world and left behind questions that will never fully be answered. As we close this chapter, remember her name, Diarra Thompson. Remember her light, her promise, her dreams. Because while the headlines will eventually fade, her story should never be forgotten. And perhaps the scariest part of all is not just what happened to her, but knowing that it could happen again. This is not just a crime story. It's a wake-up call, one that demands we look closer, act faster, and fight harder, so that no other family has to endure the nightmare that Diarra's family faced.